Hello and welcome to my channel. The title of this video is A Basic Study of the Maruts in the Vedas. Introduction. Who are the Maruts? Quote, "The Maruts, shudders of showers, endowed with restless might, like formidable lions traversing the world with their energies, resplendent as fires, laden with water and blowing about the wandering clouds, give a vent to its collected rain." Unquote. Rig Veda, Mandala 2. These verses express the dominant image of the Maruts, which identifies this warrior band of the Devas with the winter monsoons. These violent storms attack with howling winds and weaponized rain that tear through the jungles and cities of India. It is not surprising that the ancient seers of the Vedas, with their poetic vision, saw in them the celestial armies of the Devas, echoing in the skies their own battles with the Dasyus. The power of this symbolism in the deeper strata of cultural memory spreads far. The Northern European legends of the wild hunt, which blows across the night sky in pursuit of lost souls, is seen by some scholars to be a local reincarnation of the Vedic Maruts. The huntsman would be one of the destructive forms of Lord Rudra in his aspect as patron of hunters and brigands. Classes of beings. But the Maruts are not reducible to merely thunderstorms or storm gods. The Vedic literature presents us with four main classes of beings who are called celestial people. Among these are the Maruts. These classes are hierarchically related based upon their roles and dwellings in the structure of the cosmos, which may also be understood metaphorically as their state of development and responsibility in the management of the world. The top of this chain of being are the Devas, of which the Adityas have a special status. These are followed by the Rudras and then the Vasus. The ancestors who have attained a higher status are the Pitris. We also find this division in the Yajurveda, where we are told by the sages that ritually the Vasus are associated with the Gayatri meter, the Rudras the Tristup meter, and the Adityas, as the head of all Devas, by the Jagti meter. In the Atharva Veda, another class is added called Yakshas. These seem closely related to the chthonic pre-classical Greek keres and the Northern European fairies before the High Middle Ages, when they began to be reduced to their present status as children's tales. The Maruts are a category of the Rudras. All Maruts are some form of Rudras, but not all Rudras are Maruts. The number of Maruts is given as 7 times 7, while the Rudras are in the innumerable thousands. We also see this distinction demonstrated in the fabrication of the Ahavaniya altar in the Yajurveda. In the fifth and final layer of bricks laid to construct this fire altar, the inauspicious south is dedicated to all Rudras, which says something about their nature. But the Maruts, who while also dangerous have a benevolent aspect in that they bring the rain, are separated, and the north side of the altar is dedicated to them. Method of textual analysis. Triplication. The role of the Maruts in creation falls into two basic categories: the divine armies and the monsoon rains. While these poles are delineated in the Vedas, the poetic imagery of the sages blends them in most hymns. We also find that these external forces which unfold across the celestial and terrestrial spheres are also active within the psychology of man. The method I will be using to analyze this in the Vedas is called triplication. When one takes a term in the Vedas, such as Agni, for example, and studies the mantras consistently, one finds that the term is used generally in 3 different ways, which are determined by context. There is the celestial Agni, who is the Deva Lord Agni, and the terrestrial Agni, who is fire, and most often, specifically, the physical fire of the sacrificial altar. There is Agni in the microcosm. This is Agni as an aspect of the human energy body. When we apply this structure to the Maruts in the 4 Vedas, we find that the celestial Maruts are the divine armies, the terrestrial Maruts are the monsoons or other storms, and the Yogic Maruts are aspects of the mind. This video is a basic study in this subject. I wish to emphasize, as always, that my research is my own and I am not speaking from any position of authority. I leave it to the viewer to reach your own conclusions. I encourage all, especially those who may disagree with me, to study the Vedas and other sources directly yourselves to verify my claims or to discover for yourselves the Rheingold buried there. I will note as many of the sources and references as I can fit in the notes below to facilitate this for the curious or the critic. The Celestial Maruts, the Divine Armies. A general description of the Maruts. The Maruts are generally described in terms of a band of young male warriors. Their appearance is said to be fierce but beautiful and purple-hued. They are brilliant-eyed and appear self-radiant. One mantra goes so far as to describe them as a bridegroom decorated for a wedding, while another tells us that they are handsome as kings. They are also called resplendent as fires. This is perhaps, because they are defined as being pure energy. One of the most common descriptions of the troop of Maruts is that their armor and ornaments are like rays of the sun. Their breastplates are gold, as are their helmets. They are visualized by the seers as being heavily draped in opulent and flashing ornaments. The sages tell us they wore golden ornaments on their breast, white garlands on their shoulders, and also the Maruts have various decorations, as birds have many-colored feathers. They also wore purple ornaments and carried both lutes and pipes. They also sang. They have the ability to enlarge themselves at will, and in the Yajurveda they are called the giants of the sky. Their chariots are also portrayed as blazing and closely parallel with the lightning. These vehicles are also said to have golden wheels. They are armed with radiant lances, and at times these are described as bolts of lightning, as are their ancient blazing weapons. As Rudras, they naturally possess a terrible strength and tremendous energy. Poetically, they are portrayed as both frolicsome as a calf, and like a boxer. They are also said to be like young men with prostitutes. Anyone familiar with young males in such situations know they express their energy by being very noisy. The Maruts are the same and are often described as loud-sounding and joyous. Perhaps the dominant trait of the Maruts, however, is that they are swift-moving. They are also called golden birds and compared in their movements to the aerial acrobatics of the hawk. A surprising trait for a band of such high testosterone youths is that they have a subtle hermaphroditic aspect. They are described in one hymn as decorated like females, and in another, they carry their lances like girls upon their shoulders. One way to understand this is that they appear much like males in early adolescence who still have some feminine characteristics. However, we shall see this description hints at a concealed aspect of the troops. Another interesting trait of the Maruts is that they appear to lack individuality. We are told that they are all brothers of the same age, equal with none superior to the other. They are said to be of one mind and mutually supported. The Samaveda sings the close united friends are licking one another's backs. We are also given a revealing metaphor to describe the structure of the troops. Quote, who are united to a common center, like the spokes of a wheel of a chariot, unquote. This explains why they were born simultaneously. We find this same description elsewhere in the Vedas. In the Atharva Veda, the hymn for the sacrifice of the ox dedicates the teeth to the Maruts. Perhaps this is because the teeth are all set closely together and work at a united purpose. Another way to view this is that the close and pounding streams of the monsoon rains, which are associated with the Maruts, might be metaphorically described as teeth. And while these are possible, they certainly do not argue to a more esoteric meaning to this. On the subject of sacrifices, ritually, the soma brew was offered to the Maruts in the morning and evening sacrifice, along with Lord Indra. When exhilarated, they give good gifts, some of which we shall see when studying their activities. Activities of the Maruts. The primary function of the Celestial Maruts is their role as divine armies. In their warrior aspect, they not only fight alongside Lord Indra in his battles with Asuras, but they are protectors of the human community as well. This is done not only by assisting the Aryan warriors to help gain spoils in war, as found in the common prayers of the sages of the Vedas for sons, cows, and vigor, but they are also concerned enough to help mankind in both big and little issues. In the legends which have left their footprints in the Vedas, the Maruts have a wider range of activity than merely managing thunderstorms and being the vanguards of battle. They also convey their devotees beyond sin. There is a legend that Lord Agni hid himself. None of the Devas were able to find him. However, the Maruts were the ones to discover his location and return him to fulfill his role as the priest of the Devas. For those who believe the Maruts are only reducible to the natural phenomenon and not independent beings, this demonstrates that that is not the case. contradictory statements about the Maruts. When all the verses about the Maruts in the Vedas are gathered together and studied consistently, the reader will discover that there are three subjects on which they are contradictory. These are the animals which draw their chariots, who is the actual leader of the troops, and finally, their origins. Given the unitary nature of the Maruts, we would expect consistent descriptions of both their appearance and their origins. Vehicles. The first contradiction we will examine is the question of the mount or vehicles of the Maruts. In the Vedas, we find the Maruts regularly described with three different animals drawing their chariots. 1. Deer. The first animal we find most commonly drawing the chariots of the Maruts is the deer. These are usually described as red and spotted, as well as swift-moving. 2. The youthful steeds. The second animals we find drawing the chariots of the Maruts in other verses are the youthful steeds. Quote, "May the Maruts come to our presence with benefaction. May they who are possessed of knowledge come with most excellent and brilliant treasures, since their glorious horses, the youthful, gather wealth even from the far shore of the sea." Unquote. These swift horses are described as parti-colored steeds, of whom the Maruts are the lords. But the Maruts are not the only ones connected with these steeds. Primarily, they are the property of the Deva of the winds, Lord Vayu. Quote, "Harnessing the youthful, whom the devoted worshippers desire, to your common car come, Indra and Vayu." Unquote. These steeds then are the far-traveling winds, and the dual associations of Lord Indra and Lord Vayu here suggest joint activity involving the Maruts. In some places, we find that Lord Indra is the charioteer of Lord Vayu. When fighting together in battle, the Maruts, the cavalry, would utilize the youthful steeds. The Atharva Veda gives varying numbers for the sizes of the teams of the youthful, mentioning specifically three sets, which are 11, 21, and 33. Cows. The third mount we find associated with the Maruts are cows. Quote, "They who ride on parti-colored cattle, the Maruts, dispatched by Prisni and recalling the engagement made by them with their friend." Unquote. Leadership. The second contradiction we find in a surface reading of the Vedas regarding the Maruts is the subject of their leadership. Considering, as we have seen, the Maruts do not appear to be self-directed, the question of their leadership is important. We are told of three different Devas who are the leaders of this troop. 1. Lord Indra. Overwhelmingly, the Maruts are portrayed as the troops of Lord Indra. Repeated, here is referred to as the leader of the Maruts. The Maruts are also described as the minstrels of Indra's bounty. And this may be the reason why they are also petitioned by the sages for the material boons of cows, treasures, and generally happiness. Lord Rudra. Lord Rudra is not only the father of the Maruts in most mantras, but is also portrayed as their leader. Quote, "O Lord of the Beast, grant us happiness. O Feller of the demon Kashi, use your weapons against the Deva's opponents. Kill not the tame, but wild beast. Our salutations to the army of Rudra. May, by your grace, we stay fearless." Unquote. In the Vedic era, Lord Rudra was often associated with storms and violence as well as healing. Here we see him invoked with his army, the Maruts, for protection. This is a function we have seen them undertake in other places as well. Lord Vishnu. Finally, we see the Maruts are also portrayed as followers of Lord Vishnu. The two are invoked together on one occasion to guard the future infant, and we see in another hymn the Maruts more actively involved in one of the central tales of the preserver. Quote, "To Vishnu, to the mighty, whom the Maruts follow, let your hymns born in song go forth. Evaya Marut." Unquote. Lord Vishnu is here described as making his mighty stride, and he came forth joy-giving with the heroes. These heroes are the Maruts who accompany Evaya Marut out of the spacious dwelling, their home in common. This verse explicitly states that the Marut's home is the region of the sky where Lord Vishnu dwells. This is the highest point or the zenith of heaven. Origins of the Maruts. As with the leadership, the origins of the Maruts are also obscured by conflicting tales. When we consider that all the Maruts emerged into existence at the same time and are connected, any attempt to reconcile this becomes problematic. Lord Rudra. The most common tale of the Maruts is that they are the offspring of Lord Rudra. The mother of the Maruts is the cow Prisni. The Maruts are called Gautamara, meaning born of a cow. In the Yajurveda, the sacrifice to the Maruts is a cow embryo. Given that they are the offspring of the cow, the poetic logic of this is apparent. That is, that a single calf may represent the deeper unity of the troops, while many, they are connected as one calf. Max Muller notes in his commentary on the Vedic hymns, and you will note I don't quote him often, quote, "The host of Maruts is frequently spoken of in the singular," unquote. In other words, while they are many, one verb is often used to describe them. Lord Indra. There is one reference which calls them by the rather generic term descendants of Indra, which seems to assume a genealogical relationship between Lord Indra and Lord Rudra that are not expressed elsewhere. Lord Indra is an Aditya, while Lord Rudra is not a member of this divine family of Devas. That makes this statement anomalous if it is read as literal genealogy. Deified humans. The third origin to attribute to the Maruts is not that of a divine or a pure birth at all, but, quote, "The Maruts who are of the earth are augmented, so are those of the vast firmament," unquote. The Maruts of the earth, as they are called, were not originally an etheric species at all, but deified humans. We are told specifically by the seers of the Rig Veda that they were sages who attained to immortality as Rudras. Quote, "Inasmuch, Agni, as the pure Maruts worshipped you equally pure, with clarified butter for 3 years, therefore they acquired names worthy to be repeated at sacrifice, and being regenerated, obtained celestial bodies." Unquote. Perhaps it is true what the sages tell us about the Maruts, quote, "No one can know their origin, unquote. Resolution and the emanation theory. It may be possible to design various constructs to reconcile these verses. However, the simplest explanation is that the term Maruts is generic and does not refer to one specific group alone. There are distinct sets of Maruts. One set of Maruts are associated with Lord Rudra, and in the later Puranas were transformed into Lord Shiva's Ganas. Another host are aligned with Lord Indra and his exploits, while a third assist Lord Vishnu. The humans who became Rudras are yet another group we will consider in a moment. One puzzle remains, which is the relationship of the Maruts among themselves and to the Deva to whom they are attached. Because the Maruts are not individually directed and are like spokes of a wheel, united by a common center which shares one mind, the question now becomes, what is found at the center of this nexus to direct them? We find one example which explains this and will serve as a basis to analyze the structure. Quote, Rodasi, the associated scatterer of the clouds, with disheveled tresses, the mind devoted to her lords, woos them to associate with her. Radiant in form, she ascends the car of the restless Maruts, unquote. Rodasi is our first example. Unfortunately, there is no detailed information about this goddess in the Vedas. As a storm goddess, it would be proper to assume she has some relationship with Lord Indra. However, it should be admitted a second candidate for this goddess may be Lord Rudra's maiden daughter. It is Rodasi who is poetically said to woo or lead the Maruts and mount their car, which is here singular. She would seem to be the axis around which this set of Maruts rotates. This female core also explains another curious trait of the aggressive and masculine young Maruts we saw earlier, the hint of femininity. We see this pattern repeated, although with different inflections, with Lord Rudra and Lord Vishnu. While the Maruts associated with Lord Rudra are his armies, we saw specifically that these troops who ride cows were dispatched or sent by their mother, Prisne. The only fragment of a narrative we have about them is in this verse, so we only see them acting under the directions of their mother, again a female figure. In the later Puranic literature, the consort of Lord Vishnu is goddess Lakshmi. While she is mentioned as a goddess of nutrition in one mantra in the Rig Veda, there is no discussion of this role or any female associations with Lord Vishnu in the Vedas. However, he may still fit this pattern. In the Atharva Veda, we are told the cow is Vishnu. This identification with the primeval cosmic goddess, who is the cow spoken of in this mantra, means that he has a feminine aspect, or perhaps more properly, according to some, she has a male aspect, which is reflected in his activity as the cosmic order. We have no details about the troops associated with Lord Vishnu, but what we lack here is compensated for by the clue to fully understand the relationship between this female core of the Maruts and the Deva to whom they are connected. The cow, or femininity, is an aspect of Lord Vishnu, while his troops with him is actually stated in one verse, where we are told that the Maruts are one-minded with mighty Vishnu. In Tantra, I mention this by way of example alone, not to build an argument from this later idea. It is understood that the energy of the male Deva is their feminine aspect, which is called in Sanskrit Shakti. I believe these goddesses, whether defined as such with Rodasi or the forms of cows with Lord Rudra and Lord Vishnu, are the manifestations of the energies or Shaktis of these Devas. These entities, called Maruts, are then emanations of the Devas from their Shaktis or energies, which they manifest for specific tasks. In the Vedas, this seems to be predominantly military. This would explain the distinction of vehicles for the Maruts as well. Perhaps they manifested with cows, deers, or horses, depending upon the nature of their activity or the devas from which they emanate. There are any number of possibilities here. Counterpoint 1. An argument from Vedic sacrifices. One vector of attack to challenge the emanation theory is that it is assumed in the Vedic sacrificial rituals that the Maruts are a single, identifiable group who are to be placated so they will be generous and grant boons. Were they transitory entities, their presence in the ritual would be anomalous, as they would be unable to fulfill the petitions of the seers for their patrons and the community on their own. In the morning Soma pressing, we find the first cup is offered to Indra Marutavan with the following invocation: "Here drink the Soma, Indra, girt by Maruts." Unquote. This is offered with a hymn from the third mandala of the Rig Veda, which praises Bhagavan and invites him to drink Soma with the Maruts. The second cup is offered to Lord Indra in the same form. In this invocation is a mantra addressed to Soma saying, "You for the Maruts energy." The hymn offered with this cup is also from the third mandala of the Rig Veda. This reads, "Indra, accordant with the banded Maruts, drink the Soma, hero." Here too, the Maruts were invited to partake of the Soma sacrifice with Lord Indra. We know that the Maruts were exhilarated by Soma, but the only connection we find between them and this offering in the Yajurveda is when they are associated with Lord Indra. Thus, they are subordinate to him. The Maruts do not receive a cup of Soma independently. Another hymn where the Maruts receive oblations is with the sacrifice of an ox given in the Atharva Veda, as has been mentioned previously. Quote, "Lightning is the tongue, the Maruts are the teeth, Revity is the neck, the criticus are the shoulders, unquote. Revity and criticas are lunar asterisms or nakshatras. Revity is in Pisces, where my own Saturn and Rahu are conjoined, and the Pleiades or criticus is in Aries, which is where my Mars is placed. The Maruts, as the teeth, are closely associated with the tongue or lightning. It would appear that this offering is dedicated to the activity of the Terrestrial Maruts, who would be for the deified humans who play a role in the bringing of the rains rather than the divine armies of the Devas. This rationale is based on the presence of the lightning. We shall see more about them shortly. The Maruts are found as the sole objects of sacrifice in only one instance in the Yajurveda. This is not a regular offering, but an act of expiation. The only cows acceptable for sacrifice in Vedic ritual were barren. However, if a sacrificed cow was unknowingly pregnant, then the embryo would be wrapped and offered to the Maruts, here called the giants of the sky. The hymn from the Rig Veda chanted to sanctify this offering helps to decode the intention. Quote, "The best of guardians hath that man, within whose dwelling place ye drink, O Maruts, giants of the sky. O ye of true strength, strike the demon with your thunderbolt, conceal the horrid darkness, drive far from us the devouring fiend." Unquote. Pardon me. The Maruts are summoned here in their aspect of the divine armies to protect the Brahmins from any repercussions from their error in sacrificing the unborn calf. The probable reason being that since they are the offspring of the cow, they would be special protectors of calves. Lord Indra's Maruts were already present as they were called upon with their lord earlier. Therefore, this is not an invocation to specially call them to the hall of sacrifice. Here they are asked to simply assume their function as guardians. At no place I can find in the sacrificial rites are the celestial Maruts, the Rudras, alone invoked to receive offerings. They are always present with the Deva. Thus, there is no argument from petitions in Vedic sacrifices that contradict the emanation theory. Counterpoint 2. Offspring of the Maruts. Another position from which to question the emanation theory of the Maruts is based upon statements that the Maruts have offspring. This would seem to imply that they are stable beings which exist in their own right and able to reproduce, thus not simply reducible to an appendage of a Deva. A general point to make here is that these offspring are not attributed to a single member of the Maruts, but to the group in plural. That would argue against a more literal reading of these mantras, since reproduction is only one-on-one in all realms and not from a group. Let us examine these verses. Quote, "Prop heaven, fill full on the earth and firmly. Dyutana, offspring of the Maruts, plant you." Unquote. One might conclude reading this verse that the sage Dyutana is a child of the Maruts. The context in which this mantra is used is when the shed for the Brahmins is being erected, which will be used during the sacrifices. The prop heaven refers to the central pole of the shed. Dyutana is the name of a seer who is the poet of hymn 85 in the 8th mandala of the Rig Veda. The Maruts, who were deified humans, came earlier in history. Perhaps the Vedic seer was a descendant of theirs, or through his merits joined the troop of Maruts himself. The Satapatha Brahmana interprets this name to mean Vayu, as the wind and not the actual sage. Go, both of you, by Swaha consecrated, to Urdhvamadavas, offspring of the Maruts. Reading this verse, one might conclude that this is another child of the Maruts, or a Marut. The context in which this is happening is that after the sacrifice, the two sticks upon which flesh were roasted are cast into the Ahavaniya fire. Because they are consecrated, they may not be simply disposed of, although the horns of sacrificed animals were thrown into a specially dug pit. This word is translated as "he who is in the clouds on high." The commentators understand this as a name for Vayu, to whom earlier in this invocation the doos grass, which was used to clean the victim and was then laid on it and came in contact with all of the blood, was cast into the fire. We know that Lord Vayu is not an offspring of the Maruts, as he is an Aditya, a different class of beings, as well as offspring of Aditi. In this context, then, Vayu here too means winds. We have already seen the winds do have a connection with the Maruts, so there are no offspring as children from the Maruts, so these verses do not contradict the emanation theory. Deified humans, the Kachina model. This model resolves all of the contradictory statements about the Maruts in the text of the Vedas, save for one. That is the terrestrial version of their origin. We see that there are definitely two classes of Maruts, not simply those of pure birth, which are some form of etheric species, and are emanations of the Devas. In studying the roles of the Maruts played in the Vedas, we see that they fall into two basic categories: the military and the etheric managers of the natural phenomena of the monsoons. It appears that the military function is taken by the Maruts as emanations of the Devas. The deified humans, then, would be, as they are closer to the human community, they provide for their needs predominantly through affecting the monsoons. This is similar to the role played by deified ancestors in the Kachina cult of the Hopi Indians in the southwest of the United States. Those who have passed continue to aid the community because their, quote, chief function is to bring the rain, unquote. It is these Maruts whom the seers of the Vedas saw behind the terrestrial manifestation of the Maruts, which we will next examine. The Terrestrial Maruts, the rains, the monsoon rains. Perhaps the most common identification of the Maruts is with the monsoon rains. the 19th century Western scholars, such as MacDonald, viewed the Maruts exclusively within this context as storm gods. And that, of course, is just another example of their narrow worldview and reading of the Vedas. The Maruts are the leaders of the rains and the clouds. Metaphorically, we find the image of the rains as milk in the udders of the clouds. The rains contained within the clouds is also compared to embryos, which the monsoons are Maruts tend, also a rationale for the embryo offering. The annual return of the showers of the rainy season, as described as when Prisni gives milk from her udder once a year. Quote, combined with solar rays, they have willingly poured down rain for the welfare of mankind. Unquote. Regarding this rain which the Maruts bring annually, we find the seers pray to Lord Rudra to send down rain without wind. The reason for this is to palliate the effects of the monsoons which make all things tremble and damage the forest with their winds and torrential downpours. They roar like lions. This harmonizes well with the combative image of the Celestial Maruts. The storms are also called warriors in chainmail. These overlords of the mountains are said to pour down the showers of vigorous strength, which leap like a bold girl in a man's embrace, or like a matron tumbled by her husband. Along the same line, the monsoons are also described, they, the Maruts, like rushing bulls mount on the dark clouds. Another critical function of the terrestrial Maruts is to bring fertility to the earth. They deposit in her water as their germ, as the husband generates the embryo of the child. It is through this regeneration that the Maruts defeat the dry season, represented by the demon Nritri. In this aspect, as the winds, they are considered the offspring of the terrestrial Vayu. Quote, you begat the Maruts of the firmament for the purpose of showering rains, for the purpose of replenishing the rivers. Unquote. The Yogic Maruts, aspects of the mind. Quote, may the Devas, who are to be lauded by the hymns of the Angirasas, come hither for our protection. May Indra with his treasures, the Maruts with the vital airs, or prana, and Aditi with the Adityas come, give us felicity. Unquote. The microcosm. Before man was reduced to a biological machine whose sole purpose is to process resources according to the iron algorithms of Darwinian law in a dead universe, or the oligarchic metaphysics of dominance, there was a different view of the human spirit which taught us that which exists in the stars and in nature is reflected within man. In the words of the Hermetic sage, as above, so below. This worldview was shared by the seers of the Vedas. In one passage in the Atharva Veda, they tell us, quote, one who knows man thinks, this is Brahman, for all the Devas are seated in him as cows in a stall. Unquote. The Yogic Indra. The celestial Lord Indra is the king of the Devas. There are none of them, the seers tell us, stronger than he. The sky is the visible form of the terrestrial Indra. His are the thunderstorms that dominate the horizon, which is the limits of our perception. What they share is that both dominate the worlds wherein they reside. In the inner world of human beings, this is the role of the individual empirical ego. The ego is the level of our psyche where conscious choices are made. Hence, it is the monarch which usually defines and dominates our mental horizon. The Atharva Veda describes Lord Indra as the administrator of the world, who creates oceans and gigantic rivers, thus reworking and augmenting what exists, but yet is not the ultimate source. This is the mysteriously described Ka, whom the seers purposefully left nameless. It is Ka who is the silent witness behind the scenes. All of this perfectly encapsulates the individual empirical ego and its role. The Yogic Vayu. In the celestial sphere, Lord Vayu is the governor of the air element. His natural counterpart in the terrestrial level are, of course, the winds and the air we breathe. The Yogic Vayu, in the narrower sense, is the prana moved by the physical breath of the individual. He is called by one sage the soul of the Devas and the germ of the world. These two are deeply linked, as this is one of the ways living creatures ingest and expel the vital force, or prana. It also could be understood as respiration in general. Vayu is, we are told, the minister of the 5 vital airs, which are the activities of this prana. The relationship between Indra and Vayu in the microcosm. The conjoined form of Indra Vayu appears in several hymns of the Vedas. We also see this proximity between them expressed ritually. In the Soma sacrifice, Lord Vayu always receives the first portion, to be followed by Lord Indra, who is given the largest amount of the brew. The nature of this relationship is defined in one mantra. Quote, "Come, team drawn with thy 100 helps, with Indra seated in the car, Vayu, and drink your fill of Soma." Unquote. Pardon me. Indra is the charioteer of Vayu. Translating this from the symbolic to the psychological, to quote one martial arts writer, Qi follows the mind, Qi being the Chinese equivalent of prana. The prana, as a chariot and its team, must be driven or they're inert. This is the role of the ego within the individual. And this framework, we can now turn to examine the Maruts in the microcosm. The Yogic Maruts. The inner Maruts, reflecting their counterparts, are emanations of this empirical ego. By reviewing the primary qualities associated to the others, we can see this concept, and we can form an idea of the traits which define this psychic phenomenon. The Maruts are swift and mercurial. Excitable, they are agitators who can swing between the extremes of bringing joy and providing nourishment to the other end of chaotic forces of destruction. This is because they are pure energy which arises from the life force that animates ego. In Freudian terms, for example, without advocating the passé materialism of this school, we might describe them as psychic energy arising from the libido, which is their inner feminine core. Some might argue that the sexualized imagery associated with their activity supports this reading of the symbols. This is one way, at least, to partially conceptualize the Yogic Maruts. Knowledge. But there seems to be more to them. They have one aspect attributed to them by the sages that does not match with either the celestial or terrestrial forms. Knowledge. In fact, they are called prachetasas, or possessed of superior knowledge, or intelligence, pardon me. This would not apply to the emanations of the energy of the Deva, as these beings appear to lack individuality, nor could it be said that the thunderstorms are intelligent or possess knowledge. Thus, this is an inner phenomenon. They are described as the sapient troop of Maruts, who, in the same hymn, are said to dispel darkness. Another description of similar activity we find by the Maruts fits well here, as they demolish what is stable, scatter what is ponderous. It is in this capacity that the Maruts were able to find and reveal the location of the hidden Agni, as related in hymn 52 of the first mandala of the Rig Veda. This is the form of Agni, which is in the heart of man, and is the wellspring of immortality. This is the reason the seers counsel us that those who are wise see that their mind stands in the heart. The structure of the inner devas of man, Indra and Vayu. To assemble these components into a simplified symbolic structure, Indra drives the chariot of Vayu, while his emanations, the Maruts, are the lords of Vayu's Nuta steeds, or rides them. This is in two parallel levels. The top is mind, Indra plus the Maruts, which equal prana/breath form, or Vayu plus Nuta steeds below. These winds of Vayu milk the seven rays, which are associated with prana in a fire form or aspects of the yogic Agni. This is the hidden Agni of the legend. The Maruts and Nuta steeds in the model. In the architecture of the mind, the most probable candidate to identify with the Maruts is the flow of cognition. This is the inner chatter of the mind. Our thoughts arise from the empirical ego and are often as swift in their countervailing movements and unpredictable as the winds of the thunderstorms. A further description, which is key to defining them as cognition, is the association with knowledge. But one might well argue that my definition of knowledge here is too narrow. It is not necessarily restricted to verbal data, but there is also emotional knowledge as well. The emotions are a part of the mind which can be described in the same metaphors as well, and have just as much, and in many a greater share, of driving our choices as cognition. The emotions, like thought and reflection, can lead us along the path towards self-recognition, which is liberation. That, in fact, is a key component of devotion. Tentatively, I would say that the emotions are symbolically the Nuta steeds and the Maruts the thoughts, which are their lords or drive them. We saw earlier in the Atharva Veda that Lord's Vayu steeds are grouped into 3 sets. This would match well with classifying emotional states according to the 3 fundamental qualities or gunas, which are a later development of Indian thought. These are harmoniousness, activity, and chaos as manifested in the mind. With these thoughts, I will conclude this study of the Maruts in the Vedas. I hope it has stimulated either further curiosity or strong disagreement, and that those who may feel these things will turn to the sources themselves to explore further. Do not allow anyone to lock the Vedas away from you in a Chinese puzzle box, but gaze into their light on your own and begin your study from there. Thank you very much for your time.